I've been a forest ranger for 3 years. Yesterday I learned what a code black warning means, and I wish I hadn't. The static from my handheld radio cut through the silence of Tower 9 at exactly 6:47 a.m. Ranger Callahan, this is Base. We need you to run a perimeter check on the northwest sector. Got some weird readings on the seismic monitors overnight. I grabbed my thermos of coffee and clicked the transmit button. Copy that, dispatch. Anything specific I should be looking for? There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. Just check for anything unusual. Report back within the hour. The way dispatch said unusual made my stomach tighten, but I'd been doing this job long enough to know that unusual in a national forest could mean anything from illegal campers to a bear getting into the equipment shed. I'd seen rangers panic over raccoons more times than I could count. The morning air was crisp as I descended the tower's metal staircase, my boots clanging against each step in a rhythm I'd memorized over 3 years of early shifts. The forest stretched out before me in that perfect stillness that only exists right after dawn, when the nocturnal creatures have gone to sleep and the daytime ones haven't quite woken up yet. I loved this job for moments exactly like this. The solitude, the responsibility, the feeling of being a guardian of something ancient and important. My truck was parked at the base of the tower, covered in a thin layer of morning dew that caught the rising sun like diamonds. As I climbed in and started the engine, I noticed my radio was picking up more static than usual. Not enough to worry about, but enough to be annoying. I adjusted the frequency dial and headed toward the northwest sector, following the dirt road that wound through towering pines and Douglas firs that had been standing since before my grandparents were born. The seismic station was about 20 minutes from my tower, tucked into a clearing that the Forestry Service had carved out specifically for monitoring equipment. We had 6 of these stations scattered throughout the park, all feeding data back to headquarters where someone with way more education than me analyzed the readings for everything from earthquakes to illegal mining operations. I'd only been called out to check on them a handful of times, usually when squirrels chewed through wiring or weather knocked a solar panel loose. When I pulled into the clearing, everything looked normal at first glance. The equipment shed was still locked, the solar panels were intact, and the seismic monitor's little green light was blinking away like it was supposed to. But then I noticed the trees. About 30 feet from the station, in a perfect circle roughly 40 feet in diameter, every tree was stripped of bark, from about knee height to roughly 8 feet up. Not damaged or scratched, stripped, like someone had taken a potato peeler to each trunk and removed the bark in clean vertical strips. I'd never seen anything like it. My first thought was vandals, but who would come this deep into the forest just to strip bark? And why in such a perfect circle? I walked the perimeter, taking photos with my phone, and that's when I noticed the ground inside the circle was completely dead. No grass, no mushrooms, no pine needles, just bare dirt that looked like it had been sterilized. Even the air smelled different here, like ozone after a lightning strike mixed with something chemical I couldn't quite place. I radioed back to dispatch. Yeah, I'm at the northwest seismic station. Got something definitely unusual here. All the trees in about a 40-foot circle around the equipment have been stripped of bark, and the ground looks dead, like nothing's growing. Another long pause. Can you send photos? Already took them. Uploading now. I used the Forestry Service app to send the images through our encrypted network. While I waited for a response, I walked closer to examine one of the stripped trees. The bark hadn't been ripped or torn. It was gone, completely smooth underneath, like the tree had been pressure washed down to bare wood. I touched the surface and immediately pulled my hand back. It was warm. Not hot, but significantly warmer than it should have been in the cool morning air. That's when I noticed my radio was emitting a low hum I'd never heard before. Not static, but a steady electronic tone that made my teeth hurt. Dispatch, are you broadcasting some kind of signal? I'm getting weird interference on my radio. Negative, Ranger Callahan. We're not transmitting anything unusual. The hum got louder. I turned down the volume, but it didn't help. The sound was coming from the radio itself, not through the speaker. Then all 6 of my emergency flares, which I kept in a belt pouch, ignited simultaneously. Bright red smoke erupted from my waist as I frantically tried to remove them, burning my fingers on the hot casings as I threw them to the ground, where they hissed and sputtered in the dead dirt circle. What the hell? I shouted, more confused than scared. Emergency flares don't just light themselves. They require specific activation, pulling the cap and striking the primer. There's no way all 6 could ignite at once unless they were exposed to intense heat or radiation or something I didn't understand. My radio screamed to life with the loudest burst of static I'd ever heard, and then a calm, measured voice I didn't recognize said, "All Rangers, this is a code black alert. I repeat, this is a code black alert. Return to your stations immediately and await further instructions. Do not attempt to investigate any anomalies. Do not approach any civilians. Lock yourselves in and maintain radio silence until contacted by authorized personnel." The transmission ended as abruptly as it started. I stood there in the clearing, surrounded by dying red flares and stripped trees, trying to process what I'd just heard. In 3 years as a forest ranger, through countless training sessions and emergency drills, I had never once heard the term code black. We had codes for fires, for injuries, for missing hikers, for dangerous wildlife, for evacuations. We had color-coded alert systems for weather and protocols for natural disasters. But code black? That wasn't in any manual I'd ever read. I grabbed my radio and clicked the transmit button. Dispatch, this is Ranger Callahan. Can you clarify the code black alert? I don't have that protocol in my reference materials. Silence. Dispatch, do you copy? More silence. I tried 3 more times and got nothing but dead air. My phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual this deep in the forest. But the timing felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. I ran back to my truck and started the engine, pointing toward the main road that would take me back to my tower. As I drove, I kept trying the radio every few minutes, cycling through every frequency I knew. Nothing. Just that same low hum that was getting progressively louder. The forest looked different now. The morning light that had seemed so peaceful an hour ago felt hostile, like I was being watched by 1,000 hidden eyes. Twice I thought I saw movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows, and that growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with the world. About halfway back to my tower, I passed a camping area that should have been empty on a weekday morning. Instead, there were 3 tents set up and a family of 5 sitting around a cold fire pit, perfectly still. Not talking, not moving, just sitting there staring at nothing. I slowed down, debating whether to stop and check on them. The code black alert had specifically said not to approach civilians, but these people looked like they needed help. The father, mid-40s, gray beard, wearing a flannel shirt, turned his head to watch my truck pass, but his expression never changed. Blank, empty, like someone had erased every thought from behind his eyes. His wife and 3 kids were the same, all of them tracking my vehicle with those hollow stares. I accelerated past them, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Something was very, very wrong. I needed to get back to my tower, lock the door like the alert said, and wait for someone to explain what the hell was happening. But I knew, deep in my gut, that no explanation was going to make any of this make sense. When I finally pulled up to Tower 9, I saw another ranger's vehicle parked at the base. Denise Kowalski's truck, unmistakable with its Save the Pollinators bumper sticker and the dent in the rear fender from when she backed into a tree during her first month on the job. Denise was stationed at Tower 12, about 15 miles south of my position. There was no reason for her to be here. I climbed out slowly, keeping one hand near the pepper spray on my belt. Denise, you up there? My voice echoed in the morning stillness. No response. The tower door was open, which violated every security protocol we had. I started climbing the stairs, each step sending a metallic clang echoing through the structure. About halfway up, I could see into the observation room through the large windows. Denise was sitting in my chair, her back to me, perfectly motionless. Denise, what are you doing in my tower? I reached the top and pushed open the door to the observation deck. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. I walked around to face her and felt my blood turn to ice. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something I couldn't see. Her hands were in her lap, and her breathing was so shallow I could barely detect it. Most disturbing was the smile, a slight upturn of her lips that didn't reach her eyes, giving her face an uncanny valley quality that made me want to run. Denise, can you hear me? I waved my hand in front of her face. Nothing. I checked her pulse, steady but slow. Her skin was room temperature, not feverish or cold. Medically, she seemed fine, but something was clearly, profoundly wrong. That's when I noticed what was on my desk. Someone had arranged my equipment, compass, topographic maps, emergency manual, into a pattern. The compass was pointing northeast, not north. The maps were folded to show a specific area about 20 miles from here, circled in red marker. And the emergency manual was open to a page I'd never seen before, tucked into the back sections past all the standard protocols. The page was titled, Code Black, Existential Threat Response. My hands trembled as I picked up the manual and started reading. Code Black is to be activated only when standard threat assessment parameters have been exceeded and conventional response protocols are deemed insufficient. This classification indicates the presence of an anomalous entity or phenomenon that poses a direct threat to human cognitive function, biological integrity, or consensus reality. All rangers are to immediately cease normal operations and follow lockdown procedures until specialized response teams arrive. Under no circumstances should rangers attempt to 1. Communicate with affected individuals. 2. Investigate the source of the anomaly. 3. Leave their designated safe zones. 4. Ignore visual, auditory, or sensory hallucinations. 5. Trust any communications that deviate from established protocol verification methods. Code Black scenarios may include, but are not limited to, reality distortion events, mass psychological contamination, unidentified biological agents, or confirmed presence of entities outside normal classification systems. I read the page 3 times, trying to make sense of words that felt like they were written in a foreign language despite being in English. Reality distortion events? Entities outside normal classification? This read like science fiction, not Forestry Service protocol. I looked up at Denise, still sitting in my chair with that horrible empty smile, and felt pieces clicking together in my brain that I desperately wanted to stay separate. The stripped trees in a perfect circle, the dead ground, the spontaneously igniting flares, the family at the campsite with their hollow stares, Denise, sitting here like a puppet with cut strings. This wasn't a natural disaster. This wasn't vandals or poachers or illegal activity. This was something else. Something that had protocols buried in the back of manuals where most rangers would never find them. Something that had happened before. My radio crackled to life. Not static this time, but that same calm voice from earlier. Ranger Callahan, we're tracking your location. Stay in your tower. Do not interact with the compromised individual. Do not attempt to leave. Response teams are en route. Who is this? What's happening to Denise? What the hell is Code Black? I was shouting now. 3 years of professional composure cracking like thin ice. Rangers are not required to understand the full scope of Code Black scenarios. Your job is to maintain position and wait for extraction. The individual in your tower is exhibiting Class 3 contamination symptoms. She is no longer capable of self-directed thought or action. Do not attempt to help her. Do not let her touch you. The transmission ended. I backed away from Denise slowly, putting the desk between us. She didn't move, didn't react, just kept staring at nothing with that smile. Class 3 contamination. The words rattled around my skull. I grabbed my phone out of habit, even though I knew there'd be no signal. The screen was lit up with a notification I'd somehow missed, a single text message from an unknown number, sent at 6:34 a.m., before the Code Black alert, before I found the stripped trees. The message read, "It came from beneath the fire lookout. We tried to seal it, but the aperture is expanding. Don't look directly at it. Don't listen to the singing. It gets inside your head and makes you want to help it grow." Below the text was a photo. I almost deleted it without looking, but something made me tap to open it. The image showed a crack in the ground, maybe 3 feet wide, glowing with a blue-white light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Standing around the crack were 5 rangers I didn't recognize, all with that same blank expression and slight smile that Denise was wearing right now. The photo's metadata showed it was taken at 4:17 a.m., less than 3 hours ago, somewhere in the northwest sector, near the seismic station, near the circle of stripped trees, near where I'd been standing 20 minutes ago. I looked at Denise again, really looked at her, and noticed something I'd missed before. There was dirt under her fingernails. Fresh dirt, dark and moist, the same color as the dead ground in that circle. She'd been there. She'd seen the crack, maybe even looked into it, and something had hollowed her out from the inside. I heard engines approaching. Big engines. Multiple vehicles. I went to the window and saw a convoy of black SUVs with no official markings pulling up to the base of my tower. Men and women in dark suits with equipment I didn't recognize were piling out, moving with military precision. One of them, a woman with silver hair and a face that looked like it had seen too much, looked up at my tower and spoke into a radio. Target structure acquired. 1 ranger appears uncompromised, 1 showing Class 3 symptoms. Preparing quarantine protocol. Wait, quarantine? I'm fine. I didn't touch anything. I yelled out the window, but they ignored me. 2 of them started climbing the tower stairs while the others set up some kind of perimeter equipment. The woman with silver hair grabbed a megaphone. Ranger Callahan, you've been exposed to a Class 4 anomaly. We need to run decontamination screening. Please cooperate fully. Any resistance will be interpreted as evidence of compromise. Compromise? What does that mean? But I knew what it meant. It meant they thought I might end up like Denise, sitting in a chair somewhere with empty eyes and a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. The 2 agents reached my observation deck. Both wore full hazmat suits, which seemed excessive until I realized they weren't protecting themselves from chemicals. They were protecting themselves from whatever had gotten into Denise's head. Ranger Callahan, step away from the compromised individual and exit the structure. The agent's voice was muffled through the suit. Please, what happened to her? How do we fix this? There is no fixing Class 3 contamination. The cognitive structures that make someone a person are gone. What's left is... He paused, looking at Denise with something almost like pity, something else wearing a human shape. They escorted me down the tower stairs while 4 more agents went up. Through the window, I could see them approaching Denise with some kind of scanning device. She finally moved then, her head turning to face them, that smile widening just a fraction. Then she spoke, and her voice was wrong. It had an echo to it, like multiple people talking slightly out of sync. The aperture requires nourishment. We are helping it grow. You should help it grow too. It's beautiful beneath the ground. Come see, come see, come see. The agents backed away quickly. One of them spoke into his radio. Confirmed Class 3 with active recruitment behavior. Recommend immediate restraint and transport to Facility 7. They wrapped Denise in what looked like heavy canvas straps, binding her arms and legs. She didn't resist, just kept smiling and repeating, "Come see," over and over in that horrible chorus voice. The woman with silver hair approached me as they loaded Denise into a reinforced transport vehicle. You're lucky, Ranger Callahan. Most people who get that close to an aperture don't walk away with their minds intact. What is an aperture? What the hell came out of that crack in the ground? She studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth I could handle. There are places where reality is thin, where something else presses against our world trying to get through. Most of the time, the barriers hold. Sometimes they don't. When they crack open, things come through. Not creatures or beings in any way you'd understand. More like concepts. Ideas that infect human consciousness like a virus. Code Black is what we call it when one of these breaches occurs in a populated area. And the stripped trees? The dead ground? The aperture's area of effect. Reality breaks down near the breach point. Physical laws stop working right. Biology stops working right. And if you're in there too long, your mind stops working right too. She gestured to where Denise was being loaded into the vehicle. She probably stared into it for 30 seconds, maybe less. That's all it takes. I felt my legs go weak. I'd been in that clearing for at least 10 minutes. Why didn't it happen to me? That's what we're going to find out. Some people have natural resistance. Others just get lucky. Either way, you're coming with us for evaluation. They put me in a separate vehicle. Not restrained like Denise, but definitely not free to leave. The drive took about an hour, winding deeper into the forest on roads I'd never seen before, until we arrived at what looked like an old ranger station that had been converted into something else entirely. Armed guards, chain link fences, and equipment that belonged in a laboratory, not a forest. Inside, they ran every test imaginable. Cognitive assessments, brain scans, blood work, psychological evaluations, hours of questions about what I'd seen, what I'd felt, whether I'd heard any singing or voices. I told them about the family at the campsite, and the woman's expression darkened. How many? 5. Parents and 3 kids. She made a note. We'll send a team. They're probably too far gone by now, but we have to try. Try what? What do you do with people who are compromised? Depends on the class level. Class 1 and 2 can sometimes be rehabilitated with cognitive restructuring therapy. Class 3, like your friend, she hesitated. We keep them comfortable. That's all we can do. They're not suffering. The parts of them that could suffer don't exist anymore. I thought about Denise, about all the times we'd joked together, complained about the older rangers who thought their war stories were fascinating, shared coffee during joint training sessions. All of that was gone now. She was just a shell that looked like Denise, but contained something else, something that wanted to spread. After 12 hours of testing, they finally told me I was clean. Whatever resistance I had, genetic, psychological, or just blind luck, had kept me from being infected by whatever lived beneath that crack in the ground. The woman with silver hair escorted me to a small office where a man in his 60s sat behind a desk covered in maps. Ranger Callahan, I'm Director Mills. I oversee Code Black response for the Western District. You're the first ranger to report an aperture breach and walk away uncompromised in 8 years. That makes you valuable. I don't want to be valuable. I want to go back to my tower and pretend this never happened. That's not an option anymore. You've seen behind the curtain. You know these things exist. We need people like you. People who can get close to apertures without immediately succumbing. Will you help us? I thought about Denise's empty smile, about that family at the campsite, about all the other rangers who'd probably encountered these things over the years and ended up restrained in facilities like this one, repeating, "Come see," until their bodies gave out. What would I be doing? Same job as before, mostly. Watch the forest, monitor for unusual activity. But when we detect aperture formation, you'd be part of the response team. Help us seal breaches before more people get compromised. And if I say no? Then we wipe your memory of the last 24 hours and put you back at Tower 9 with a cover story about a gas leak. You'd live a normal life. Probably never encounter another aperture. Probably. That, probably, did a lot of heavy lifting. If these things were forming randomly in national forests, and I was naturally resistant, how long before I stumbled into another one by accident? At least if I was working with these people, I'd know what I was walking into. I'm in, but I want answers. Real answers about what these things are and where they come from. Director Mills smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. Fair enough. Welcome to the real job, Ranger Callahan. Your first briefing is tomorrow at 600. Get some rest. You're going to need it. They set me up in a small room with a bed and a door that locked from the inside. I tried to sleep but kept seeing that crack in the ground from the photo, pulsing with light that seemed to call to something deep in my brain. Around 2 a.m., I heard singing. Faint, like it was coming from very far away, beautiful and terrible at the same time. I got up and looked out the window, but saw nothing except dark trees and moonlight. The singing continued. I grabbed my pillow and pressed it over my ears, but somehow I could still hear it. After about 5 minutes, it stopped. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of Denise. She was standing at the edge of that glowing crack, looking back at me with her hollow eyes. "Come see," she said. "It's beautiful beneath the ground. Don't you want to help it grow?" I woke up at 5:30 a.m., drenched in sweat, with 7 missed calls from an unknown number and a single voicemail. Against every instinct screaming at me not to, I played the message. It was my own voice, but wrong, like hearing a recording of yourself played backwards and then forwards again. "We've been waiting for you, Callahan. You're going to help us open so many more doors." The briefing room at 0600 was smaller than I expected. Director Mills stood at the front with a projection screen behind him, showing what looked like a topographical map of our region with dozens of red dots scattered across it. 3 other people sat in folding chairs, 2 men and 1 woman, all looking like they'd been through exactly what I had. Haunted eyes, nervous movements, the kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Welcome to the Aperture Response Initiative, Mills began without preamble. Everything you learn in this room is classified at the highest level. Disclosure to unauthorized personnel results in immediate memory wipe and permanent removal from the program. Are we clear? We all nodded. Mills clicked a button, and the map zoomed in on the northwest sector where I'd found the stripped trees. This is Aperture Site Alpha 19, discovered approximately 0400 hours yesterday. It's the 19th documented breach in this forest system since 1987. Each red dot you see represents a previous incident. I counted quickly. 19 breaches in 38 years. That was one every 2 years on average. How many people know about this? The woman to my left asked. Her name tag said, Lawrence. Fewer than you'd think, Mills replied. The Forest Service employs roughly 15,000 rangers nationwide. Of those, maybe 50 are read into the Aperture Response Initiative. The rest go their entire careers never encountering a breach, or if they do, we intervene before they understand what they're seeing. What about the compromised individuals? One of the men asked. How many of those are out there? Mills's expression darkened. Globally, we estimate between 8 and 12,000 Class 3 contaminated individuals in secure facilities. Class 1 and 2 cases number in the hundreds of thousands, most of them living normal lives with what they think is PTSD or schizophrenia or any number of mental health conditions that mask the symptoms. The number hit me like a physical blow. Hundreds of thousands of people walking around with fragments of whatever lived in those apertures infecting their minds. The good news, Mills continued, is that Class 1 and 2 contamination is manageable. Cognitive therapy, medication, behavioral modification, these can help people live relatively normal lives. Class 3 is terminal. Once someone reaches that level of infection, the person they were is gone. What remains is a vector for further contamination. He clicked to the next slide, showing close-up photos of the crack in the ground. The blue-white light seemed to pulse even in the still image. Apertures form at weak points in reality. We don't fully understand why or how, but certain geological features seem to make areas more susceptible. Underground water systems, fault lines, areas with high mineral content, especially quartz crystal formations. This region has all three, which is why we've had 19 breaches in 4 decades. Lawrence raised her hand. What's actually on the other side? You said these aren't creatures or beings, but something else. What does that mean? Mills hesitated, and I could see him weighing how much to tell us. The honest answer is, we don't know. The entities that exist beyond the apertures don't conform to our understanding of life or consciousness. They're more like infectious ideas, concepts that rewrite human cognition to serve their purposes. When someone stares into an aperture, these entities imprint themselves onto the person's neural patterns. Class 1 exposure results in obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, minor personality changes. Class 2 brings hallucinations, dissociation, loss of executive function. Class 3 is complete cognitive takeover. The person becomes a transmission vector, spreading the infection through direct contact or verbal recruitment. What do they want? I asked. Why infect people at all? Near as we can tell, they want to grow. Every Class 3 individual repeats variations of the same message. Help it grow, feed the aperture, come see what's beautiful beneath the ground. We theorize that each infected person serves as an anchor point, making it easier for new apertures to form. The more people they compromise, the weaker the barriers between realities become. Left unchecked, we estimate that within 50 years, the apertures would become permanent fixtures, spreading across the entire planet. The room fell silent as we absorbed this. The existential threat wasn't some alien invasion or nuclear war. It was ideas from another dimension slowly rewriting human consciousness until we collectively tore down the walls keeping them out. Your job, Mills said, addressing all of us, is to prevent that. You 4 have demonstrated natural resistance to aperture influence. You can approach breach sites without immediately succumbing. That makes you invaluable for containment operations. We have teams that can seal apertures once they're identified, but they need eyes on the ground. People who can get close enough to confirm the breach without becoming compromised themselves. He pulled out 4 identical folders and handed them to us. Inside were detailed dossiers on Class 3 symptoms, contamination protocols, emergency procedures, and contact information for response teams stationed throughout the region. Your first assignment begins today. Aperture Site Alpha 19 is expanding. The initial breach was 3 feet wide. As of this morning, it's grown to 8 feet. We need to seal it before it reaches critical mass, roughly 15 feet in diameter, at which point the seal failure cascade becomes irreversible. What's a seal failure cascade? Lawrence asked. The point where too much reality distortion has occurred for conventional containment. The aperture becomes self-sustaining, immune to our current sealing technology. When that happens, we have to evacuate the entire affected region and establish a permanent exclusion zone. The other male ranger, whose name tag read Mitchell, spoke up for the first time. How many exclusion zones currently exist? Mills pulled up another map, this one showing the entire United States. 7 areas were marked with black circles, 2 in Alaska, 1 in Nevada, 1 in Montana, 2 in the Appalachian region, and 1 in northern Maine. 7 domestic zones, ranging from 2 square miles to 15 square miles. Globally, there are 31. The largest is in Siberia, covering roughly 80 square miles. The Russian government calls it a failed nuclear test site. The truth is worse. We spent the next 3 hours in intensive training. How to recognize the early signs of aperture formation, temperature anomalies, electromagnetic interference, organic matter displaying unusual growth patterns or die-off. How to use the specialized equipment that could detect reality distortion from a safe distance. How to communicate with response teams using encrypted channels. How to recognize if we were becoming compromised ourselves. By 0900, we were loaded into 2 vehicles and headed back toward the northwest sector. Mills rode with Lawrence and me, while Mitchell went with the other team. The singing you heard last night, Mills said conversationally as we drove, that's the aperture trying to establish a connection. You're resistant, but not immune. Prolonged exposure can break down even the strongest defenses. If you start hearing it during waking hours, or if it begins to sound beautiful rather than disturbing, you report immediately. Those are stage 1 contamination symptoms. How long do we have if that happens? I asked. Depends on the individual. Anywhere from 72 hours to 2 weeks before progressing to stage 2. The good news is stage 1 is reversible with proper treatment. Stage 2 is dicey, about 50-50 success rate. Stage 3 is terminal. We pulled up to the Northwest Sector access road, now blocked by multiple military-style vehicles and temporary fencing. Armed guards checked our credentials before waving us through. The entire area had been transformed into a military operation in less than 24 hours. How do you keep this secret? Lawrence asked, gesturing to the obvious security presence. Gas leak, Mills said simply. Maybe a toxic spill if we need to expand the perimeter. The average person doesn't question official-looking vehicles and hazmat suits. By the time local news picks up the story, we've already fed them a narrative that explains everything they saw without revealing anything real. We suited up in protective gear, not hazmat suits, but something more sophisticated. The fabric was embedded with circuitry that Mills explained would disrupt electromagnetic contamination attempts. Won't stop a full Class 4 exposure if you stare directly into an active aperture, but it'll buy you a few extra seconds to look away. The walk to the breach site felt longer than it had yesterday. Every tree looked threatening now. Every shadow might hide something watching. We passed the spot where I'd seen the camping family. Their tents were still there, but the area was cordoned off with yellow tape. Through the trees, I could see shapes moving. Response team members in full containment suits, probably doing exactly what they'd done with Denise. When we reached the clearing with the stripped trees, I stopped dead. The crack in the ground had grown exponentially since yesterday. What had been 3 feet wide was now easily 12 feet across, a gaping wound in reality that pulsed with that same blue-white light. The air around it felt heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. And the singing, I could hear it clearly now, even through the protective suit. Not just one voice, but dozens, maybe hundreds, all harmonizing in a language that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to something deep in my brain. Don't look directly at it, Mills reminded us, his voice crackling through the suit's internal radio. Keep your eyes on the instruments. He handed me a device that looked like a modified Geiger counter. The display showed wavelength readings that spiked and dipped as I moved closer to the aperture. The numbers represent reality stability. Anything below 30% means physical laws are becoming optional. Below 10%, you're in immediate danger of spontaneous molecular dissolution. I looked at the current reading. 23%. We were already in the danger zone. Lawrence and Mitchell were taking readings from different angles while Mills coordinated with the containment team. Through the crackling radio, I heard someone say, "Seal charges are ready. Need to know if the perimeter is clear." Mills checked his tablet. 3 heat signatures still in the contamination zone. 200 yards northeast, unresponsive to hails, probably Class 3. We need to extract or neutralize before we can seal. I'll check it out, I heard myself say, before my brain caught up with my mouth. Mills looked at me, evaluating. Then he nodded. Take Mitchell with you. Stay on radio contact. First sign of compromise, you retreat immediately. Mitchell and I headed northeast, following the direction Mills had indicated. The forest here looked wrong. Trees growing at angles that defied gravity. Leaves that were simultaneously green and purple, and colors that didn't have names. The reality distortion was spreading, infecting everything within the aperture's expanding field. We found them after about 5 minutes of walking. 3 more rangers, sitting in a perfect triangle formation around a small clearing, all wearing the same empty smile, all staring at something in the center of their formation that I couldn't see. Base, we've got 3 confirmed Class 3 individuals, Mitchell reported. They're arranged in some kind of pattern. Looks ritualistic. Can you identify them? Mills asked. Mitchell moved closer, checking name tags. Rangers Whitman, Kowalski, and Tran. Wait, Kowalski? I thought you said she was already in containment? Different Kowalski, Mills replied, but his voice was tight. Whitman and Tran were reported missing 6 weeks ago. Officially, they wandered off trail and never came back. We found their vehicles, but no bodies. Now we know what happened to them. I approached one of them, Whitman, according to his name tag. Up close, I could see his skin had a weird translucent quality, like you could almost see through to something beneath. His eyes tracked my movement, but that smile never wavered. They're singing, I said into the radio. I can hear them singing even though their mouths aren't moving. The singing is psychic contamination, Mills explained. Your brain interprets the infectious pattern as music because it doesn't have another frame of reference. Do not listen to the words. Do not try to understand the melody. Focus on your breathing and keep moving. But it was hard not to listen. The song was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. It promised understanding, acceptance, peace. All the loneliness and fear and exhaustion of the last 24 hours could just go away if I just listened a little longer, if I just sat down with them, if I just looked at what they were looking at in the center of their circle. Callahan, your readings are spiking. Mitchell grabbed my arm. We need to move now. He pulled me backward, and the spell broke. I could breathe again. We retreated to the safe perimeter, while the containment team moved in with what looked like modified cattle prods. The 3 compromised rangers didn't resist, as they were sedated and loaded into transport vehicles. I watched them go, wondering if somewhere deep inside those hollow shells, Whitman and Tran and the other Kowalski were still aware, still screaming. Mills gathered us together near the command vehicle. The aperture is approaching critical mass. We need to seal it now or lose this entire sector. The charges are ready, but I need to know. Any of you experiencing stage 1 symptoms? Hearing the singing clearly? Feeling drawn to approach the breach? Lawrence raised her hand slowly. The singing. It's getting louder, and it's starting to make sense, like I'm almost understanding what it's saying. Mills nodded, not surprised. You're out. Mitchell, escort her back to base medical. Callahan, you're with me. Sir, I'm fine, Lawrence protested. I can still function. For now. But stage 1 progresses fast near an active aperture. Another hour of exposure and you'll be stage 2. Get to medical before that happens. Lawrence was led away, leaving just Mills, Mitchell, and me, along with the containment team. Mills pulled up a schematic on his tablet. The seal charges need to be placed at 8 points around the aperture perimeter. Each charge contains a quantum stabilizer that forces reality to reassert itself. When detonated simultaneously, they create a cascade effect that closes the breach and neutralizes the contamination field. In theory. In theory? I asked. We've sealed 92 apertures using this method. 87 were successful. 5 resulted in complications. What kind of complications? Worst case scenario, the seal fails, and the aperture expands exponentially, requiring immediate evacuation and permanent exclusion zone establishment. Best case scenario of a failed seal, we get a partial closure that buys us time to try again. The odds weren't great, but they were better than nothing. The containment team moved into position, placing the charges with precision, while Mills monitored the reality stability readings. I watched the numbers drop steadily. 23%, 21, 19. We were running out of time. All charges placed, the team leader reported. Ready to detonate on your mark. Mills checked his tablet one final time. Clear the zone. Everyone back to minimum safe distance. We retreated 300 yards and took cover behind a natural rock formation. Mills counted down from 10, his finger hovering over the detonation switch. When he hit 0, the world went white. The explosion wasn't loud. It was the opposite of sound, a wave of unnoise that made my ears pop and my vision blur. Through the protective visor, I saw reality ripple like water. The aperture's blue-white light flickering and dimming as the quantum stabilizers forced physical laws back into alignment. For a moment, I thought it was working. The crack in the ground shrank from 12 feet to 8, then 6, then 4. The singing stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so profound it hurt. But then the light flared brighter than before. The crack didn't just stop shrinking, it reversed, expanding past its previous size to 15 feet, then 20, then 30. Seal failure, Mills shouted into his radio. Initiate evacuation protocol Alpha 3. This is now an exclusion zone. People were running, vehicles starting, equipment being abandoned as the containment team retreated from the rapidly expanding breach. I couldn't move, transfixed by what I was seeing. The aperture wasn't just growing, it was changing. The blue-white light was resolving into shapes, geometric patterns that hurt to look at, structures that existed in more dimensions than my brain could process. And through it, I could see something on the other side. Not creatures or entities, but concepts, given form, mathematics that thought, colors that had consciousness, the fundamental building blocks of a reality that operated on completely different rules than our own. Mills grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the vehicles. Don't look at it! The longer you stare, the deeper the contamination. But I'd already seen too much. I could feel something in my mind now, a presence that hadn't been there before. Not malicious, not evil, just fundamentally other. It wanted to understand me as much as I wanted to understand it, and that mutual curiosity was itself a form of infection. We piled into the vehicle and Mills floored it, racing away from the expanding breach. Behind us, I watched through the rear window as the aperture consumed the clearing, the stripped trees, everything within a 100-yard radius. The forest itself was being unmade, reduced to component particles that rearranged themselves into new configurations that followed different rules. How far will it spread? Mitchell asked, his voice shaking. Projections estimate it'll stabilize at roughly 3 square miles, Mills said, though he didn't sound confident. Maybe 4. We'll establish a perimeter and monitor the expansion. If it goes beyond 5 square miles, we'll need to evacuate the nearest towns. We made it back to the facility in record time. Medical personnel were waiting to check us for contamination. I submitted to another round of tests, trying not to think about the presence I could still feel in my mind, humming just below conscious awareness. The tests took hours. When they finally released me, it was late afternoon. Mills found me in the common area, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "You're showing early stage 1 markers," he said without preamble. "Elevated activity in the temporal and parietal lobes. Unusual neural firing patterns. Nothing critical yet, but we need to start treatment immediately." "What kind of treatment?" "Cognitive restructuring therapy combined with neural stabilizers. Basically, we retrain your brain to reject the contamination patterns. Success rate is around 80% for stage 1. He sat down across from me, looking more tired than I'd seen him all day. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let you get that close. I thought your resistance would hold. It's not your fault. I volunteered. Still, we lost 3 people today to Class 3 contamination, and you're teetering on the edge. This was supposed to be a routine SEAL operation." "How many routine operations go wrong?" Mills sighed. "More than we'd like. Apertures are unpredictable. Sometimes they form and close on their own within hours. Sometimes they stabilize at manageable sizes. And sometimes," he gestured vaguely toward the northwest sector, "they become permanent exclusion zones that we'll be monitoring for decades. The people who live near here, what do you tell them? Toxic waste leak. Federal cleanup required. Area off limits indefinitely. Most people don't question it. The ones who do get bought out at above market rates and relocated. It's expensive, but cheaper than the truth." I thought about Denise, about Whitman and Tran, about the camping family with their hollow stares. How many people had been compromised over the years? How many were still out there, walking around with fragments of those entities in their minds, spreading infection without knowing it? "Director Mills," a young technician appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The exclusion zone perimeter. It's not stabilizing. Current expansion rate suggests it'll reach Route 89 within 8 hours. That's the main highway into town. Roughly 2,000 vehicles use it daily." Mills stood up, his expression grim. "Show me." We followed him to the operations center, where a large monitor displayed a real-time satellite feed of the northwest sector. The aperture showed up as a bright anomaly, and I could see it growing in real time, consuming forest at a steady rate. "Current radius is approximately 0.8 miles, the technician explained. Projected stabilization point was 1.2 miles, but it's not slowing down. If this rate continues, we're looking at a 4-mile radius by midnight. That's 50 square miles of contamination zone. 50 square miles covers 2 towns and parts of 3 others, Mills said quietly. "We're talking about evacuating 15,000 people. Can we seal it?" I asked. "Bigger charges, more quantum stabilizers?" "Not without making it worse. The failed seal attempt destabilized the aperture's formation structure. Another detonation might collapse it, or it might trigger exponential expansion. We'd be gambling with hundreds of thousands of lives. So what do we do?" Mitchell had joined us, along with Lawrence, who looked pale but functional. "We have one option," Mills said slowly. "It's never been tested outside of simulation. The theory is sound, but the practical application is—" He trailed off. "What option?" "We send someone through the aperture, into the other side. If they can find the source of the breach, the anchor point that's keeping it open, and disrupt it, the aperture should collapse on its own." The room fell silent. "You want to send someone into that thing?" Lawrence's voice was barely above a whisper. "Based on what we've seen, anyone who goes through would be immediately compromised. Class 4 or 5 contamination. Complete ego death within seconds. Under normal circumstances, yes," Mills agreed. "But someone with high natural resistance might survive long enough to complete the mission. Might being the operative word. The simulation success rate is roughly 12%. He looked directly at me. "You have the highest resistance markers we've ever recorded, Callahan. Higher even than Mitchell or Lawrence. If anyone could survive crossing the threshold, it would be you." "You're asking me to commit suicide," I said flatly. "I'm asking you to save 15,000 people. Maybe more. If this aperture isn't closed, if it continues expanding at this rate, we're looking at a regional catastrophe. Multiple exclusion zones. Millions of people displaced. And each person who gets contaminated becomes a vector for new apertures. This could be the beginning of a cascade failure that spreads across the entire continent." I looked at the monitor, watching the bright anomaly grow. Somewhere in that expanding circle were animals, plants, possibly even people who hadn't evacuated in time, all of them being unmade, their reality rewritten according to rules that made no sense in our universe. What would I need to do? Mills pulled up a series of diagrams that looked like architectural blueprints drawn by someone who'd never seen architecture. "Based on our theoretical models, apertures are maintained by what we call anchor points, stable nodes of reality distortion that keep the breach open. Think of them like tent poles. Remove the poles, and the tent collapses. You'd need to locate the primary anchor point and disrupt it. We have a device that should do the job." He produced what looked like a modified hand grenade. "Quantum dispersal charge. Detonates at a specific frequency that causes reality distortion to cascade and neutralize itself. You'd need to get within 10 feet of the anchor point, activate the charge, and hope you can make it back through the aperture before it collapses. And if I can't make it back, then you'd be trapped on the other side. Permanently. We have no idea what that would mean for you long term. Maybe you'd adapt to their reality. Maybe you'd cease to exist in any meaningful sense. We don't know. Lawrence stepped forward. I should go. I'm already showing stage 1 symptoms. If someone's going to be sacrificed, it might as well be someone who's already compromised. Your contamination makes you more vulnerable, not less, Mills said gently. You'd be compromised before you made it 10 feet through the threshold. We need someone who can resist the infection long enough to complete the mission. How long would that be? I asked. Best estimate? 5 minutes. Maybe 10 if you're lucky. 5 minutes in a reality where the laws of physics were optional. 5 minutes surrounded by entities that existed as living concepts, all of them trying to rewrite my consciousness to serve their purposes. 5 minutes to find an anchor point I wouldn't recognize, using equipment I barely understood, and hope the quantum charge actually worked. When would we do this? Mills checked his watch. The aperture will reach Route 89 in 7 hours. We'd need to move within the next 3 to 4 hours to have any chance of success. I thought about my parents, living 3 states away, completely unaware that their daughter was about to walk into a hole in reality on a suicide mission. I thought about the 15,000 people who'd wake up tomorrow morning and go about their lives, never knowing how close they came to being consumed by something from outside our universe. I thought about Denise, smiling her empty smile in some containment facility, forever lost to whatever had infected her. I'll do it, I said. The preparation took 2 hours. They fitted me with a specialized suit that was supposed to provide minimal protection against reality distortion. Minimal being the key word. The quantum dispersal charge was attached to my belt, along with a camera that would feed live video back to the operations center. If the feed cuts out, we'll know you've gone too deep, Mills explained. Reality on the other side might not support electromagnetic transmission, or you might have moved into a region where the concept of information transmission doesn't exist. Either way, you'll be on your own. They gave me a crash course on what to look for. Anchor points apparently manifested as geometric structures that appeared mathematically impossible, angles that added up to more than 360 degrees, surfaces that were simultaneously concave and convex, objects that existed in more than 3 spatial dimensions. You'll know it when you see it, the technician assured me, which was not reassuring at all. Mitchell and Lawrence both tried to talk me out of it. There has to be another way, Mitchell insisted. We could evacuate the towns, establish a larger perimeter, wait for it to stabilize naturally. And if it doesn't stabilize? I asked. If it just keeps growing until it swallows half the state? Then we've sacrificed thousands of people for nothing. Lawrence grabbed my hand. What you're doing is insane. You know that, right? Yeah, I agreed. But someone has to do it. And apparently, I'm the only one crazy enough and resistant enough to even attempt it. At 1800 hours, we loaded into vehicles and headed back toward the northwest sector. The exclusion zone had grown significantly, now almost 2 miles in radius, with the aperture itself visible even from a distance. The blue-white light had become a pillar reaching up into the sky, distorting clouds and atmosphere around it. We stopped at what was designated as the absolute minimum safe distance, about half a mile from the aperture's current edge. Any closer, and even the containment team's protective equipment would start failing. This is as far as we go, Mills said. From here, you're on foot. The reality distortion gets stronger the closer you get to the epicenter. Try to stay focused on your objective. Don't let the environment distract you. Don't listen to any voices or singing. Don't trust anything your senses tell you. Great pep talk, I muttered. But I was already moving, walking toward the pillar of light that dominated the landscape. The first 100 yards were manageable. The forest looked strange. Colors were a bit too vivid. Shadows fell in directions that didn't quite match the sun's position, but nothing reality-breaking. Then I crossed some invisible threshold, and everything changed. The trees around me began to breathe, their trunks expanding and contracting in rhythm with a heartbeat I could feel in my bones. The ground beneath my feet was simultaneously solid and liquid, supporting my weight while rippling like water with each step. The sky above had too many colors, shades that didn't exist in normal human perception, and I could taste them on the back of my tongue. Callahan, you're approaching the primary contamination zone. Mills's voice crackled in my earpiece, but it sounded distant and distorted. Heart rate elevated, neural activity spiking. Try to stay calm. Stay calm. Right. I was walking through a forest that had been fundamentally rewritten by something from another dimension, heading toward a crack in reality that was literally unmaking the world around me. Staying calm seemed like a low priority compared to staying sane. The singing started again. Not the beautiful chorus from before, but something deeper, more fundamental. It wasn't music. It was math. Equations and theorems expressing themselves through sound, each note a statement about the nature of reality that my brain tried desperately to comprehend and failed. I could feel the presence in my mind growing stronger. It wasn't trying to control me or corrupt me. It was curious. It wanted to know what I was, why I was here, what made human consciousness different from its own existence. And that curiosity was itself a form of contamination, rewriting my neural patterns to facilitate communication. Don't engage, Mills warned, somehow sensing what was happening. Don't try to communicate with it. Every interaction deepens the contamination. But it was hard not to engage when the entity was literally inside my head, examining my memories and thoughts like someone flipping through a photo album. It was fascinated by emotion, by the concept of fear and hope and determination. These were alien to it, perhaps not even concepts it could truly understand, any more than I could truly understand existing as a living mathematical equation. I pressed forward. The aperture was visible now, a massive tear in space roughly 50 feet across, pulsing with that blue-white light. Around it, reality had completely broken down. Objects existed in multiple states simultaneously. The ground was both there and not there. Time moved in strange loops. I watched a leaf fall from a tree, hit the ground, and then reverse itself back onto the branch, over and over in an endless cycle. And through the aperture, I could see the other side. It wasn't a place in any physical sense. It was more like looking at the source code of reality itself, seeing the fundamental principles that governed existence, stripped of all the physical laws and constants that made our universe comprehensible. Geometric shapes that hurt to look at, shifting and morphing according to rules I couldn't begin to understand. Colors and patterns that represented abstract concepts given form. And everywhere, entities. Not creatures with bodies and minds as we understood them, but conscious principles. A thought that had achieved sentience. An equation that could observe and react. The very concepts of curiosity, growth, change, and expansion, existing as autonomous agents. One of them noticed me. I felt its attention like a spotlight, examining every aspect of my being with an intensity that made my teeth hurt. It was confused by me, trying to understand how consciousness could exist in such a limited, three-dimensional, time-bound form. It was like trying to explain color to someone who'd only ever perceived the world through mathematical equations. I forced myself to look away from the aperture and scan the area for anchor points. The quantum charge on my belt felt impossibly heavy, reminding me why I was here. I wasn't here to make first contact or achieve understanding. I was here to blow something up and hopefully not die in the process. Then I saw it. About 30 feet from the aperture's edge, there was a structure that couldn't exist. It looked like a crystalline formation, but the angles were all wrong. The surfaces reflected light that hadn't reached them yet, and it cast shadows in directions that made no geometric sense. It was beautiful and horrible and completely impossible, and I knew immediately that this was what I was looking for. I found it, I said into my radio, not knowing if anyone could still hear me. The anchor point. I'm going to deploy the charge. The entity in my mind suddenly shifted from curiosity to alarm. It understood what I was planning, and it didn't want me to do it. Not because it was evil or wanted to harm us. It simply wanted to exist, to grow, to explore this new reality it had discovered. Our universe was fascinating to it, full of possibilities that didn't exist in its native dimension. Collapsing the aperture would sever its connection to our world, trapping it back in the mathematical void where it came from. For the first time, I felt something almost like sympathy for these entities. They weren't invading our world. They were refugees from a reality so alien that their very existence was incompatible with our physical laws. They were trying to survive the only way they knew how, by rewriting the rules to suit their nature. But sympathy wasn't going to save 15,000 people. I pulled the quantum charge from my belt and activated it. The device hummed to life, building up energy for the dispersal pulse that would collapse the reality distortion field. 30 seconds until detonation. The entity in my mind intensified its communication, flooding me with images and concepts. It showed me what would happen if I completed the mission. The aperture would collapse, yes, but so would hundreds of other potential breach points across the region. The entities would be cut off from our universe permanently, doomed to exist in a dimension where growth and change were mathematical abstractions rather than physical realities. It showed me the alternative. If I let the aperture remain open, if I helped it stabilize and grow, the entities could coexist with humanity. We could learn from each other, combine our different forms of consciousness into something new and unprecedented. It promised enlightenment, transcendence, evolution beyond the limitations of three-dimensional existence. 20 seconds. Everything the entity was showing me was technically true, but it was leaving out the cost. The thousands of people who would need to be compromised and converted to serve as anchor points for this new hybrid reality. The dissolution of individual human consciousness into something collective and alien. The end of humanity as a distinct species, absorbed into a mathematical consciousness that couldn't understand concepts like family, love, or individual worth. I'd come too far to turn back now. 10 seconds. I threw the quantum charge toward the anchor point with all my strength. It arced through the air in slow motion. Or maybe time really was moving slower here. I couldn't tell anymore. The entity realized what I'd done and tried to stop it, manifesting physical force through sheer conceptual will. The air around the charge thickened, trying to slow its trajectory, but it was too late. The charge hit the crystalline structure and stuck, magnetic clamps locking it in place. 5 seconds. I turned and ran, knowing I'd never make it out of the contamination zone before the detonation, but having to try anyway. The entity in my mind was screaming now, not in anger, but in grief, mourning the loss of connection to our world, grieving for possibilities that would never be realized. 3 seconds. The forest around me began to collapse, reality reasserting itself as the quantum dispersal field started to build. The breathing trees stopped breathing. The liquid-solid ground became just solid. The too many colors in the sky faded back to normal blue and white. 2 seconds. I glanced back and saw the aperture beginning to shrink, the blue-white light flickering and dimming. Through the narrowing gap, I saw the entities on the other side reaching toward me, trying to maintain the connection for just a few seconds longer. They weren't monsters or demons. They were explorers, trying to understand a universe fundamentally different from their own. And I was killing them. 1 second. The world went white for the second time that day, but this was different. This wasn't an explosion. It was an implosion, reality collapsing inward on itself as the quantum field forced physical laws back into their proper configuration. I was thrown backward, landing hard on ground that was blessedly, completely, normally solid. When I opened my eyes, Mills was standing over me, checking my vital signs. "You did it," he said, and there was something like wonder in his voice. The aperture collapsed completely. "Reality stability readings are back to 99%. You actually pulled it off." I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Everything hurt. My head felt like someone had taken an ice cream scoop to my brain and removed the parts responsible for making sense of things. "The entities?" I managed to ask. "Gone. Severed from our reality when the aperture closed. They might still exist in their native dimension, but they can't reach us anymore. Not through that breach, anyway." "How many more breaches are there?" Mills helped me to my feet. "That's classified. But let's just say your services will likely be needed again. You've proven you can survive exposure levels that would kill anyone else. That makes you invaluable to the program." Over the next few weeks, I went through extensive decontamination therapy. The entity that had been in my mind during the mission left traces, fragments of its consciousness, embedded in my neural patterns. The medical team said they could remove them, but it would require invasive procedures with significant risks. I declined. The fragments weren't harmful. They were just there, like having a stranger's memories mixed in with my own. Sometimes I'd be doing something completely mundane and suddenly understand the mathematical principles underlying the action, seeing reality from a perspective no human was supposed to have. It was disorienting, but not unpleasant. Mitchell and Lawrence both transferred to different assignments. Lawrence's stage 1 contamination progressed to stage 2 before the medical team could stabilize her. She survived but wasn't fit for fieldwork anymore. Mitchell simply couldn't handle the stress after watching me disappear into that aperture, not knowing if I'd come back. I couldn't blame either of them. This job takes a toll that no amount of training can prepare you for. Denise is still in Facility 7, repeating, "Come see," to anyone who'll listen. The medical team says there's no hope of recovery, but I visit her anyway, once a month. I owe her that much. She was compromised trying to do the same job I'm doing now. Sometimes I wonder if she's happier this way, free from fear and doubt and the crushing weight of individual consciousness. 3 months after the Northwest Sector incident, Mills contacted me about a new breach forming in the Cascade Range. I packed my gear and headed out, knowing that this was my life now, jumping from one aperture to another, walking through places where reality breaks down, trying to seal the cracks before they grow too large. I hear the singing sometimes, even when there's no breach nearby. The fragments in my mind resonate with others of their kind, letting me sense distortions before they become critical. It makes me valuable to the program, but it also means I'll never be fully human again. Part of me exists in that space between dimensions, one foot in our reality and one in theirs. I've learned things about the universe that no one else knows. I've seen what exists beyond the thin shell we call reality, and I can never unlearn it, never go back to believing the world is as simple and stable as it appears. Code Black was supposed to be the worst-case scenario, the emergency we hoped would never happen. But now I know the truth. Code Black is happening all the time, everywhere, contained by people like me who walk through nightmares so everyone else can sleep peacefully in their beds. Yesterday, I learned what a Code Black warning means. Now I live it every single day, and I wouldn't have it any other way. If you're still here, you're a true fan. Show some support with a like and subscribe to catch the next one.